Welcome. A great pleasure to have you all with us today. We have participants from around the globe, and I thank you very much for being with us today for this fascinating panel. My name is Frederick Worley. I am the Assistant Dean of Academic Design and Innovation at UC Berkeley Global, and I have the great pleasure and privilege to co-moderate this second panel of our new international event series between the French CNAM and the University of California, Berkeley Global, with the contribution of two fantastic panelists from the CNAM and from our colleagues, UC Irvine. My co-moderator is Professor Jean-Michel Rajkovic from the CNAM, and we will be able to guide you today through this fascinating discussion. The initiative of this panel event series is born out of our university partnership, which allows learners to study their MBA between Paris and Berkeley, to do study trips in the respective locations. And given these very unusual times that we live in today, we wish to provide a forum for professionals and academics where they can come together and exchange respective best practices, ideas, and visions of what is to come and how to be successful in this new normal that we're moving towards. Today, we have the opportunity to gain insights from our two global thought leaders that we have the big pleasure to have with us on how to manage out of this crisis. And I want to thank you very, very much in the name of UC Berkeley for both of you to be here with us today. We have Professor Alain Bauer, who is the chair of criminology at the CNAM and is a senior fellow of the Terrorist Center, John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York, and Professor Andrew Neumer of the University of California, Irvine, with the public health department there. I also want to take a little moment to basically have both of you introduce yourself, of course, but I want to take a little moment to give a shout out to our organizing team. Thank you all very much for having helped to put all of this into place. We are very excited to have the event going and growing, event after event. And I want to share also with the audience to please feel free to share your questions in the Q&A box. We have a team of moderators that will structure the questions, and we'll hope to address them during the panel discussion. And at this point, I'm very happy to be able to hand over to my dear colleague, Jean-Michel, to start the introduction of this topic. Thank you all very much.
As you mentioned, the last session was definitely very pleasing because something like 170 people were online. Today, I think that we are more than 230 people being connected right now, so it's very pleasing. Last topic was about marketing manifesto, if you recall. How do you work with marketing? How do we use marketing to write down and to prepare the new tomorrow we are talking about? And the session of today will be linked to managing chaos. How do we manage from chaos to a new normal? And all of us in the world are just about to go out of lockdown with a different time frame from country to country, but we are just about to go back to out of our places. And we think, and when preparing this session, that it would be possible to discuss about where do we stand, what kind of challenges we are facing right now, and what did we write, what was wrong, and also try to have a vision of what will be the new normal, and also what could be the path to the new normal. But before we go into the discussion, I leave the floor to Alain and then to Andrew to present themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Frederick. Thank you, Jean-Michel. Hello to Andrew. Hello to everybody. My name is Alain Bauer. As a French academic, we are pretty well known to be, when exported abroad, arrogant, complacent, and contemptuous. So I am under heavy medication, thanks to Jean-Michel. I begin my job as a sort of national security advisor to Prime Minister Rocard. So I was a guy who was doing strange things and was being criticized by academics. Before being an academic myself, joining the Political Science Institute in Paris, then the John Gee College. After that, the National Conservatory of Arts and Crafts in Paris, where I share the one and only chair of criminology in the country. So I am a very protected species. And I also work as a professor in Shanghai and Beijing. And I am working on how to get out of lockdown for the French government. I worked with every French administration for the last 40 years, and I escaped to the spoil system until today.
Thank you, Alain. Andrew?
Thank you very much, Jean-Michel. And I'd like to thank you, Jean-Michel and Frédéric and Nadège and all the people who worked to organize this. And thank you to the audience for joining us this morning for me in California, and good evening for those of you from Europe. I'm looking forward to telling you a little bit about the pandemic, and I'm mostly looking forward to answering all the audience questions, because I think that will be probably the most important and most interesting part of this event. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm an associate professor of public health at UC Irvine. And also associate professor of sociology at UC Irvine. I have a PhD from Berkeley in sociology, and epidemiology comes from the Greek epidemos, upon people, and so I approach epidemiology very much from the people-centered perspective, and that's why my graduate training in sociology I think is useful to inform my work, but I do have also training in epidemiology and demography. I have a master's degree in medical demography from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and a bachelor's degree in biology from Harvard.
Thank you. Maybe to launch the discussion, we will start with one presentation from Alain, then a presentation from Andrew. Alain, you frequently speak on the French media, and there are two words you are frequently using. You talk about surprise, and you talk also about blindness from time to time. And how come we are locked down? How come we didn't prepare or anticipate what's happening right now? We had signals. We had many signals for years, and here we stand. And why?
But if you like, the producer, the comedy show movie, the best part of it is what did we do wrong, which is the main part of the thing, until they ask what we do right after they succeed in the show. What did we do wrong? Everything. Everything, because as surprising it may be, in strategy, we usually explain our failure by surprise. There's a very few surprises in the history of military strategy, very, very few. Everything else is not surprise, it's blindness. Not because we don't have information, but because we don't understand information. For criminologists, we have a very easy way to understand that, which is the Sherlock Holmes way. Sherlock Holmes said, officially it's Conan Doyle, but in real, it's a real Sherlock Holmes, said, if you suppress the impossible, what stays even unbelievable must be the truth. And for crime, it's easy. Where's the woman? Where's the money? You find always a way to understand. And the good detectives on TV, they always find a good solution. For counterterrorism or for pandemia, and it's very strange to see the very same thing we did 20 years ago before 9/11 or now, what is unbelievable cannot be. We decide it will not happen. It's a human thing. It's a human factor that decide, and not the rational factor. And when we decide that something will not happen, we decide not to be prepared, because if we are going to be prepared, then it will happen. And if we don't prepare, maybe we will escape. It's magical thinking, not wishful thinking, magical thinking. And governments, when they try and something doesn't happen, are criticized because they spend money for something that do not happen. So they prefer not to spend money and not be prepared, because if it happens, it happens. And then they try to spend 2, 10, 20 times more money to try to repair things they did not prevent. So surprise is not exactly my thing. I think there is no surprise at all, not at all. Since 1918, we know almost everything about the pandemic, but we forgot, because what is new is usually what we have forgotten. And we forgot a lot of things, of all the lessons of 1918. You just look at the famous graph, Philadelphia, St. Louis, easy. You understand why San Francisco escaped from the first wave of the pandemic and not the second. You learn things and you know how it works, but we don't like to follow rules that are complicated. We don't like to have masks. The French invented masks in 1619 with Charles de Lorme to fight the plague, but we don't like them. So we exported them to the Asian and we decide not to wear them. And now we are going to wear them again, and it's very difficult to go back in history and try to understand why did we forget things. We don't learn, we forget. And that's a big part of our problem, because we live in a new world of this strange, nice machine where everything is on time, on time. We live with tweets. Tweets is the new normal of the way we think. I'm not even talking about fake news, but tweets. So we live because we are waiting for the next tweet, or we try to get the last tweet we send and we didn't really want to send, and that will have side effects. And if we don't get any tweets, that means we may be dead. So because we have no more sense of time and perspective, we are not prepared and we don't believe in things that are just in front of us. The Chinese spend 6 weeks understanding what's happening to them. Then they spend 2 days sending the news to the World Health Organization. Then they spend 2 weeks lying from Wuhan to Beijing. Then Beijing tells the whole world what's happening. And we didn't believe them. So the Italians look at the Chinese and said, no, it will not happen. Then the French look at the Italians, it will not happen. Then the American looked at the French, say it will not happen. And we lost time. So there's only one way to explain the big disaster. It's MacArthur who said it. How do you explain the way to lose a war? Easy. Too late.
Thank you very much. It's actually a very interesting perspective to segue into the view that you might have, Andrew, from this socio-epidemiologist perspective, and Alain talked a little bit about it already. Where do you think we stand today? What are the figures telling us, and how do you think this is going to continue from here on out?
Thank you, Frederic. Well, Alain touched upon a number of important points. I'd just like to echo a couple of things he said before I talk about some of the things I wanted to say. This is not what Nassim Taleb calls a black swan, because there are pandemic plans on the shelf. So there are no plans for a black swan. A black swan comes out of nowhere. We have pandemic plans. They weren't very good, and they weren't activated in time, as Alain noted, and in many cases they weren't listened to. But a black swan event is something that is unexpected, and if you have a plan for it, or if you can insure against it, it's not a black swan. Wimbledon tennis tournament had a pandemic insurance. That's not a black swan. So this is something for which we should have been better prepared. The pandemic plans were sort of born out of the bird flu scares of the early 2000s. And then came the 2009 flu pandemic, which was a real pandemic, not like the bird flu scares that kind of went away. But the 2009 pandemic, even though it met the technical definition of a pandemic, it was not severe. So everyone just sort of shrugged their shoulders and said, oh, well, pandemics are nothing to worry about. And that is what set the stage for this. The 2009 pandemic being so mild is what set the stage for this. So, what does our epidemiological feature look like? Well, I see this pandemic playing out in 3 stages. The first will be the pandemic phase we're in now. And this will last 12 to 48 months. I mean, this is not going to be short. This is not going to be 2 months. This is not going to be 3 months. And I do not believe that a vaccine will arrive that will solve everything, like a deus ex machina. So we have to be prepared for the long haul. The second phase will be where coronavirus becomes a more seasonal phenomenon, where it's like the flu season, where every winter in the temperate zones, we will have coronavirus and we will have flu. And the burden will be twice as large as normal because we'll have both. But we seem to manage okay with flu every year, even without closing schools, et cetera, et cetera. So it will be, that phase will be manageable. And then after maybe a decade, coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2 will become more like the coronaviruses we have now that cause the common cold. It will evolve towards less virulency, just like the 1918 virus never went away, it just evolved away. And the H1N1 virus from 1918 kept circulating in some form in the population until 1957. There will probably be some sort of summer lull, but it will now in the original pandemic phase, but it will be accompanied by, or followed by, I should say, a winter wave. So we are not out of this. And the Southern Hemisphere, which is just going into winter, is going to feel the brunt of winter conditions, which are profitable for respiratory viruses. I think we're going to have to start reopening, though. We cannot stay on lockdown for 24 months or 15 months. It will not happen. People will not do it. And if we try, we'll just get a black market economy instead of the real economy, with all the problems that brings. So we're going to have to start doing things slowly, spaced at least 10 days apart, preferably 20 days apart. So we say, now you can go to the park, but nothing else. Everything else is the same. Then 20 days later, now you can, go do this. You can go to a movie theater. Then 20 days later, you can. Why 20 days? Because the serial interval of the virus is 5 to 10 days. So it takes up to 10 days for anything to happen. And then we need time to see what's happening. So we need to do things spaced apart, and we need to backstop everything with surveillance, both serosurveys and viral surveillance. And we need to wear masks, as Alain talked about. It was an invention of the 17th century plague in France, but everyone around the world is going to be masking and using a lot of Zoom in their near future. And so that's sort of what the new normal looks like. A lot more commuting from home, a lot more tele meetings, masking in public, and just trying to figure out what's happening. I mean, for anyone who may be watching this on tape, this is being recorded on the 1st of May, 2020. I remember the 1st of April. It seems like 10 years ago. It was 1 month ago. So it's still a rapidly evolving situation. And maybe we can revisit this subject on June 1st and see where we're at. But it's just we learn more every day that goes by. Thank you.
So on one side, Andrew, you mentioned that phase one can last from 12 to 48 months, and we reopen and we restart and we go back to work and we go back to education and so on. So my next question is for Alain. So Alain, how do we restart actually? Because we've got to move, and the situation is still very challenging, and it will be obviously a long transition phase.
First, we need to understand, and I am totally in phase with what Andrew said, we need to understand that we are not fighting the virus at the moment. We are trying to save our hospital system. We are trying to get back to not collapse on the hospital system. And we need to understand that this pandemic is a very, very nice pandemic. it will not give us the level of death, and it will not kill as much people as usual. So you see how disastrous a very low level of virulence can do to the new economy that is all on time, all interconnected, and very, very, very low on protection and very vulnerable. The second thing is we may have not go to lockdown because there is one good pupil in the class, Taiwan. Taiwan, they knew that it will happen. They were prepared for it to happen. They didn't go on lockdown. They go on very specific way to test, trace, treat, isolate a few clusters and just control the whole situation without stopping the economy. This has been possible everywhere else. If it was possible in Taiwan, just in front of China, with a level of connection between Taiwan and China, it may have been possible everywhere else. So now what are we going to do? I agree with Andrew. I think we will have, our projection is 18 months. So we are a little more optimistic. But as he says, we are learning every day on the few side effects of this very interesting and mutating virus, which has a lot of evolution in the way it's attacking people. But now we will reopen. How are we going to reopen? First, we will need masks for everybody, mask for all. Every time we get out, we will get masks. For a lot of important congregations, it will be 1 seat on 2, 50% capacity. Maybe 2/3, no more. Every economic plans will need to re-understood the level, the balance of the economics. When you have 1,000 seats, you will have maybe 600. And then you will have to rethink how you do with 600 seats on a place that was designed for 1,000. And this is for a lot of different gatherings, sports, theaters, movies, Las Vegas, transportation, airport, whatever. Mask for all, reorganization of the way we are working, which is reorganization of the economy, which is a lot of reorganization for tourism, transportation, culture. That will change the way we are packing people. And of course, the low-cost thing will be the more vulnerable to this reorganization. It will be extremely important to understand that things are going to be more expensive. Less travel, less far travel, less low-cost travel, less low-cost everything. So this will go also for everything we pay not enough and we use very fast. And this will maybe be good for the long-time economy and not for the short-time consumption. So this is a way I think we can go out properly. But to go out properly, there is one thing we need to understand, and this thing needs to be clear, global, international, and for everybody. The only way not to contaminate or not to be contaminated is for the two parts of people who are carrying the virus, who have the virus in themselves. The virus doesn't float in the air. We are the virus. We are the virus for the other one. 75% of people are asymptomatic. The last study that was published today is clear on 3/4 of people that have been contaminated since November 15, which is the real beginning of the virus, probably, didn't even know they were contaminated, but they did contaminate other people. So the mask will be the one only totally compulsory, obligatory thing we will have. And I am sure that the French will take a good part of it with Hermes mask or Chanel mask, because Jean-Michel was trying to make product promotion before we begin. But this will be the new fashion, and we will need to understand it. Everything else will be a little more easier if we understand this one important rule.
It's actually very interesting, and I was wondering about Andrew's perspective. We have a pretty interesting situation here in California with its natural beauties, and there's polemics around people ignoring these guidelines that you were giving. There was a concentration around the topics of going to the beach and not, and whether that's actually a thing to do or not. And I believe that you have been tweeting around that topic. That's kind of it's not really a joke if you take it seriously in your perspective of reopening the economy, reopening also social activities. What is your take on that, Andrew?
So yeah, I've been tweeting a lot lately. At Andrew Neumer is my Twitter. Yeah, I mean, I actually think, much to the surprise of myself, I actually think that the beaches should be allowed because for several reasons. I mean, right now we're in the phase of trade-offs. The absolute lockdown is starting to end, and we're entering the phase of trade-offs. Trade-offs where we cannot just stay indoors for 24 months. So there will be more infections the more people go out. But it's inevitable. We cannot just stay at home and wait for the vaccine. So, beaches are places where people can go. Social distancing is possible at a beach. People go to the beach during the daytime when there's a lot of UV radiation, particularly here in California. And groups can stay 2 meters apart from one another. And, I just think, it's an epidemic of people, as Alain said. It's not an epidemic of the virus. So if we keep people locked in their homes and apartments for 24 months, sooner or later the dam will burst and people will say enough. And they will go out and they will do not some things, but they will do everything. And so I think we have to say, look, it's okay to go to the beach. Please stay apart from one another unless you already share a household and see what happens. I mean, yes, there will be some transmission, but there won't be a lot. It's outdoors. It's in the UV light. We need to start somewhere, and that's as good a place as any to start. You won't find me at the beach, and people who have a low tolerance for risk should stay away from the beach. People who are immunocompromised should stay away from the beach, and people who are, senior citizens should probably think about it. But I do trust people to judge their own tolerance for risk. There is risk tolerance in everything we do every day, even before the pandemic. And, we cannot just stay locked indoors for 24 months. So we need to start experimenting with loosening restrictions one at a time, spaced 10 to 20 days apart. And the beach, of all places, is actually the best place to start. So I do disagree with our governor and others who are saying that everyone must stay away from the beach.
And beyond the basically these recreational things that we've been talking about, beach cinemas and so on, the pressing issue is actually the one of job places. For maybe you, Andrew, and also Alain, what is this going to look like? There are just jobs that cannot function outside of the virtual, cannot function virtually, and they need this office space. And even corporations really start seeing the negative effects in certain industries on not being able to go to the workplace. That's on many people's mind. How do you project this going back to work?
Well, going back to work is going to be trickier, but many essential businesses have already remained open during this time, and others are going to have to reopen sooner or later. It is possible to work while masked. It is possible to work at 60% capacity, as Alain suggested. None of this is ideal. Of course, but we're in the land of trade-offs now. We have to experiment with trying to reopen. We have to do more testing than we've done. We have to have a hard look at antibody testing. We have to, we're going to find out more. I would predict 4 weeks from now, we're going to know a lot more about what antibody testing means in terms of, what's the sensitivity and specificity, and is it predictive of actual protective immunity? I mean, simply having an antibody in the bloodstream that lights up an ELISA dish is not exactly the same thing as saying you are immune. But we will learn more about that phenomenon as we move forward, and we will be able to correlate better the test results and real immunity. And let us all hope that people have real immunity that is durable. Because as Alain said, many people have a very mild phenomenon, including some who are completely asymptomatic. And those people may, in the best case scenario, actually have long-term immunity in addition.
We are working at the moment for reopening a lot of industries and corporations and headquarters. And the tests are very interesting. First, because the employees, they need to be confident. So the first discussion is not about the customers. It's about people who are going to work. And they are part of the teams that are working. What do they want? Mask, gel, soap, and lines, isolations, clusters, whatever may be able. And it's easy. As surprising it may be, it's easy. The big problems are lunch times or going to the coffee machine or the water machine, which is just a question of organization, timing, and changing a lot of things in the way you work, but it's not impossible. And if you work with the unions or the employee, or we decide to reopen Airbus, we decide to reopen CarWorks, we decide to reopen headquarters. Some headquarters are still working, headquarters of the post office, headquarters for trash management, headquarters for water, headquarters for electricities. We find ways during the time, and at the moment, the rules are simple. Mask, test, serology, which is just the, did you have it, did you not have it, have you something in your blood? If you have something in your blood, please go back home until we check what exactly is yours. And people discover that they are asymptomatic since still now. After 7 weeks in France, we still have 300 people entering emergency rooms, which means the virus is still spreading somewhere, like beef and pork factories in the US. There is something here because we need to learn hygiene. It's back to Semmelweis. 150 years ago, the guy who said, hey, you need to wash your hands before you touch patient in an hospital because you are transporting germs. We forgot that because we don't wash our hands enough. We don't have mask enough. If you just do that, you are able to do a lot to put people back to work. Of course, not the same number of people, not the same way, not the same idea, but work at home. And Jean-Michel knows our institution is a very old lady. In 1 week, we went from work in the classroom, and 96% of what we are doing is now done by TV, video, audio, whatever. And of course, we still have 5 or 6% of students that are very mechanical, that needs to do things. If we use those simple tools, we can make a big, huge work. And as Andrew said, 10 days by 10 days, learning by learning, discovering new things, especially on the famous immunity, which is a personal thing and not a herd thing. It's very different from people to people. So it needs to be work very well. We have a lot of treatments that will and are, for some of them, efficient. Vaccines is a long-term issue. But I think we can reboot the economy. It will not be so complicated if we do the right things and we be very clear with it. And the third thing, if I may, is we need to talk to people like they are adults, not infants or children or stupid or not able to understand. Because most of our politicians think people are stupid. The scientists think the politicians are stupid, and the politicians think the electors are stupid. It's not true. People understand extremely clearly what is said clearly and simply. And this part of the thing can be done and be very efficient without drinking Lysol.
Which was kind of an advice we heard a few days ago, obviously. On one side, you mentioned that we need to restart the corporation, the way we work, and so on. But on the other hand, we are facing also a very big challenge to adapt the offer, because the demand, the needs of the people might be quite different in the near future. Once again, to travel, to eat, and so on. So it's kind of a double challenge we are facing, isn't it? Adapt.
For me? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, of course, but it's not the first time. If you think that this is a war against the virus, you need to have a war economy and war behavior. So when we discover something new, like when you discover that the sun is tanning but give you also cancer, then you put cream and afterwards you discover that cream can be made with good products and bad products, and you evolve on the way you put cream on your skin. So we are evolving. We are a very smart species in the earth. We are very destructive, but we are very evolving, and I'm sure we can evolve. I mean, it's not necessary to be packed in a plane, to spend 7 days packed in a place where we go packed in a bus, to spend money packed in a village that has been only created for packing tourists. I mean, going to Venice during the spring or summer is not a nice experience for nobody, Venetians and tourists. So if we have to reduce that, go back to an idea that we will see the world another way, not so often, with more time, more respect for the environment, more respect for the people, more respect even for the people that live around us, and seeing the beauty of our own countries, and depending a little less from this fake economy, because it's fake economy, like we are doing fake money to save the real economy, investing in people and not only in speculation. I'm sure this can help. I'm not sure this is where we are going, because I'm not totally optimistic on how works humanity, but it's an opportunity, and I think it's a very good opportunity for business, for money, and for people.
So we talked, I'm reading the question at the same time we talk about business. Quite a few questions are linked to the education system, and all of us are teaching and slowly moving to online. But the online in the let's say higher education is one thing. The reshaping of the education starting at the primary school is very different. So you guys, how do you see the challenge? Because if you want to go to work, you certainly need to have your kids at school, safe, protected, and so on. So we jumped into talking about companies, corporations, and so on. So what is your vision about the evolution, short term and maybe long term, of the educational system?
Well, this is a tricky question. I mean, as we call it in the United States, K through 12, or basically education, primary through high school, up to age 17 or 18. I mean, it's more than just learning from textbooks and et cetera. It's a socialization of people. And so, you cannot just do 12 years of primary and secondary education in front of a computer. I mean, we will be creating generations of people who don't know how to interact with one another. So, the good news is that the virus doesn't seem to affect children as much as it does adults. And we're learning more about that at a pretty fast pace. It seems that it's really, really exceptional for children to have a severe infection. So now, of course, schools are not just children. There are teachers and there are people who work in schools for other functions. So we have to take care that we don't bring together adults who will get sick from each other or from the children. But I think we actually will be able to reopen, primary and secondary education in sooner than later, in some semblance of what we knew recently. For higher education, it's a little trickier because we're dealing with older people, and now we're talking about people who can get symptomatic SARS-CoV-2 infection, and also, it's university education is arguably more amenable to remote instruction, to Zoom instruction. Although I do not believe that Zoom instruction is as good a learning experience as being in a real classroom with real other people, listening to a real person draw lines on a real whiteboard and discuss, what these lines mean, for example. So I don't think that Zoom is a replacement for real classroom experience, and I hope that institutions of higher education will not push to make a lot of that permanent, even though the administrators may see advantages there. I am a little bit more apprehensive about students getting SARS-CoV-2 at the university level, because now we're talking about people who are young adults. And so it's a little bit more complicated. So there's a lot of questions ahead. I mean, here in the Northern Hemisphere, we're going into summer, but this is going to be a vexing issue for some time to come.
Alain, what are your comments about the educational system? Because changing let's say, the physical flow is one thing. Changing the content of education is kind of a long-term project. So
I agree with the part that is from kindergarten to, let's say, 12-year-old. It's a pretty easy thing if we understand that it will be half the class, no more than 15 people, social distancing, mask, cleaning, even creating the mask as a game and protecting the adults from the kids and not the kids from the adults. But we have some issues because since last week, we have a lot of Kawasaki type sickness in a few kids, which is more than 50 at the moment, which is enough to scare the parents, which will be another issue. But if you have the same system, testing, mask, cleaning, social distancing, integrating the new way of living as a part of a game in a school, problem will be, of course, this will be half the class, half the day, half the week. And so the reorganization of massive schooling, because this is part of the problem. We have school with 30 to 35 children, which is first was too much before the virus and will not be even possible now. So the reorganization is important. The second part is hybridization. I totally agree with Andrew. 100% visio is not possible. It's not good, and it's not necessary. But to do hybridization, which means visio, for example, at the CNAM, we have a lot of things we are the only one to do in France. And a lot of people living not in Paris wants us to do visio because it gives them the opportunity to do things they will not be able to do only if they travel, come back. It's complicated for them. So for them, it's a great opportunity. And we know that with Jean-Michel, when we open Visio, suddenly we have 2 or 3 times more students wanting to come because most of our students are working. They are not 100% students. They are workers who do studies. So but we need the physical thing. And if the physical thing is have the classroom, mask and test, like the diabetic test, 3 minutes, you know where you are, it is possible to go back to something in the middle, not half-half. I don't believe that, but like a third, two-third Visio, 1/3, personal meetings with the students, which we do. We never worked as much in our life, academic life, since the beginning of the pandemic. We have hours and hours of Visio discussion with our students, and more students, by the way, coming to the lectures by Visios than we have in the classroom. So We need to see the thing. But for the young ones, socialization, I think everything that goes before 12 or 13-year-old, where they are mature enough to understand a few other things, it's very important to find a way to reopen with rules, reopen half-half, reopen with techniques, expand the number of schools, reorganize the way we were doing schooling in big schools and not small schools. Same thing we do with hospitals. We need to have small center and big hospitals and not huge hospitals like a project. So this is possible, and this will be good for the economy. This will be good for socialization. This will be good for education itself. We just need to reduce the size, but reopen.
It's actually very interesting, that perspective, and it touches on some other questions that have been coming up that are very pragmatic. If you think about two major question marks, the one is, how do we get people to do this? And this touches a little bit upon a question that was asked of what kinds of masks should we wear? You were alluding to the stylish masks that could be created by brands. Actually, you see Etsy, for example, as a platform having a huge success with people starting to create self-made masks that look fun. You can imagine kids wearing different types of masks. So there's a question around this. How do we make it actually possible that the people, society will accept this? And the second question is, how is this even feasible economically speaking? Because one of the reasons why we are so crowded in many parts of our lives, the schools, the businesses, is because we do not effectively have the money, or let's say the margins that are made are not put into space. It's not that we don't want to have more space and be less crowded, is that effectively the current economical situation does not allow for us to have more space, and it crystallizes particularly in the public schooling systems. So I don't know, on these both tasks of how do we socialize what we need to do, and how do we make it economically possible? What is your opinions on that?
Well, I mean, economists have been worrying about running out of space since David Ricardo, if not before. I mean, I think, if we're doing half classrooms in primary schools, then we'll have to do shifts. But in Iran during the 1980s, they had a big growth spurt in population, and they were doing schools in shifts because there were more children than there were schools. And things, they survived. They just made it happen. I mean, necessity is the mother of invention is kind of an old bromide, but I think we'll figure it out. I mean, I tend to be pretty hard line on masks. I think the better the mask, the better. So, I mean, I would like to see eventually N95s be available. I mean, there's a lot of concern in the U.S. that citizens should not use those and let them be used for healthcare workers. But eventually, we're going to need to make millions of masks. And on the worldwide scale, we're going to need to make billions of masks. And we're going to need to make many billions of masks. And look, we can make billions of masks. There's other things that we won't be making as much of, perhaps airplanes, commercial airplanes, or there's many things that we won't be making as much of because we won't be using them as much. And so we have the capacity to make many billions of masks, and we'll have to. And I'm sure, there will be a Hello Kitty mask, and there will be a Spider-Man mask, and there will be, whatever you want. And so, there will be a Louis Vuitton mask, and people will want to wear those.
Yeah, I want to add on that in fact, the discussion we have at the moment is any kind of mask, like 3 layers of any kind of fabric, is 95% efficient. And the big problem of the 5% is if somebody else doesn't have a mask. if everybody has a mask, the question of going to 95 to 99 is a less important point. So I do agree on FFP2, N95 and other must be primarily reserved to firefighter, healthcare people, because dentists, because they have to go and the people they are taking care of will not have a mask. But if everybody has a mask, and if you follow instruction on the 3 layers of fabric, and of course the ability to breathe, because it's an issue, and the mask coming from the beginning of the nose until here, and covering not this, but the whole part of here, you will reduce, it will stay maybe 1% risk of, because you were touching something or you were doing wrong thing with your mask or the way you were taking it off, but this will hugely reduced to something around and less than the famous R0 thing. So you will fight efficiently the pandemic. Of course, if you can do it following the rules on how to do a mask, and you have like websites with hundreds of options to do a mask coming from Pampers, reusing the kid stuff to very nice and fashionable thing, you can do it. A very good piece of what you put a sheet in your beds, a very strong cotton thing, is very efficient. We know that if you put it and you clean it every day at least 60 degrees for at least 20 minutes, you have something you can reuse as long as you use your own sheet in your bed. But you need to do it properly at the same time, the size and thing. And then you will find a way. Of course, we will need to create and produce locally, billions of masks. And the best they are, the best they will be to fight the pandemic as long as everybody wears a mask. And those who need to take care of people that will not be able to have a mask because of sickness, because of a tooth, because of everything you need to do with people without a mask, then they need to be more protected. And of course, the big issue will be restaurants, because it's very difficult to eat with a mask. So then invention will maybe be there, or a reorganization of the way people will take their own food and go to eat, table of 2 and not of 4, less people in the restaurant, the same rules. That will be an economic issue, but it will not be a health issue anymore.
I'd just like to add to that. I endorse everything Alain said. There's what we call a dose response curve. So the higher the dose of virus, the more severe the infection. And it takes probably 1,000 viral particles to become infected. And an infectious dose, could be 10,000 viral particles. It could be 100,000 viral particles. The virus is 120 nanometers in diameter. Billions of these, millions can fit in a single droplet. So wearing a mask, even if it's not perfect, can reduce the infectious dose. So instead of inhaling 100,000 viral particles, maybe we inhale 5,000 viral particles because we are wearing a mask. And that may result in a more asymptomatic case, which nonetheless generates immunity. So masking doesn't need to be perfect to help us find our way out of this crisis. So do not make the perfect the enemy of the good. I've seen so many arguments about how, people will, the masks are great, but when people don and doff the masks, they will screw it up. I have much more confidence in people, echoing something Alain said earlier in the webinar, I have much more confidence in people being able to figure it out and help themselves than has been expressed in some quarters. So I am very much pro-mask.
Go ahead, Jean-Michel.
Yeah, I'm reading the questions. Quite a few questions are linked to how do we change a bit the direction we were taking. For example, keywords in the economy were about low price, productivity, profit, and so on. And part of the discussion we are having highlights that we've got to change our mindset and the way we teach about globalization, the way we organize the world is definitely being challenged at this stage. So I would be pleased to hear your comments about how do we realign the system in order to be compliant to the new world we are talking about. Alain?
That's the first time in history that we decide to sacrifice the economy instead of sacrificing the people, which is a very good thing because we need to invest in people and not only invest in profits. I am a liberal. I have no problem with capitalism investment. I have a problem with speculation on non-investment, speculation on speculation on speculation to create bubbles that doesn't have any connection with reality. Our big problem is the transformation of capitalism since the middle of the 90s in something totally new. Investing, creating, having a risky investment need a reward. I have no problem with that, of course. But you don't invest in nothing. You don't invest in the idea of creating something that look like a financial tool that created the 2008 crisis that we didn't learn a thing from. We didn't. We socialize the debt and we privatize the profit. It's not the way it works. So if we understand this, then we can create a very nice economy, which is a real economy, which gives a lot of opportunities to inventors, investors, people who want to do more brick and mortar. And for me, brick, mortar, and humans are a very good long-term investment because humans are consumers. People need to buy your products. If they are all dead, you will have a bigger economic crisis than the one we have. What I say is we may have avoid this economic crisis because Taiwan shows us that it was possible. We did not understood that prevention is a good investment. We learn. But now we can go back to a normal economy with real investment, real reward, good old back capitalism for those who believe in it, liberalism on the best possible way, and create a way to reorganize production with very important sovereignty production back home for obvious reason, meds, masks, everything that needs us to survive to something, and rely on normal way to discuss exchanges with the others. Yes, we will Boeing and Airbus will have bad days coming, but they may do better airplanes, more efficient, less people in it. Tourism will have to readapt for local tourism instead of international tourism. There will be a lot of changes, but people are still there. It's not necessary to go every year in 3 different countries for a week, packed for $900. Well, you can do the same thing, less packed, less far, and for less money around yours. So this reorganization is not the end of the world. It's organizing a world that is more sustainable. And I think it will perfectly work.
So this is what we are looking for quite a while, talking about sustainable development and so on. So this is maybe the beginning of the optimistic part of our discussion, isn't it? Because the beginning was very scary. The 12 to 48 months was kind of a long run. But now we can be optimistic, Andrew, about the part of the reopening, going into this new era where the values, where the role of the human might be slightly different, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, just to echo what Alain said, the 14th century Black Death, set in train a series of events that helped doom feudalism and sow the seeds for early capitalism and eventually the Industrial Revolution. And I think it's too early to say exactly where we're going, but I think capitalism is a more flexible scheme than feudalism, and capitalism will adapt in some way, shape, or form to this challenge. And I also think that that the COVID pandemic is not as severe as the 14th century Black Death. So, things will evolve. I mean, packing a population of 8 billion people, some of whom are tourists, into cities that were built in the 15th century when the world population was less than 1 billion, results in the situation that Alain described very well. Venice is no fun for either the tourists or its residents. And there will be less international tourism in the next 1 to 4 years, and maybe, even beyond that. I mean, the world has been struggling for a way to adapt to climate change, and the reduction in tourism has been discussed and mostly ignored as part of a solution to climate change. Maybe this event will catalyze a serious rethinking about how do we deal with climate change, and just ignoring these crises is not the way forward. The timescales of the COVID pandemic are faster than those of climate change, but I think some of the lessons are actually the same. And so, yeah, it's going to be, as I said before, it's a fast-moving situation, but it will be interesting to see how things evolve, but things will evolve.
I was actually wondering, to that perspective that you're sharing, it's in line with a few questions here, is how do you think these international relations will work out? There's anything in the game that could be public oppressed in certain regions. International relations could tension, or you could see maybe the opposite. Maybe if we are able to come together in a new way, in a new form of doing global economy, that will actually allow us to maybe settle some unrest that we have seen. I don't know if you have an opinion on what could happen with respect to these public international relations.
I have two brief thoughts, and then I'll let Alain answer as well, because I'm sure he has more to say. I mean, I think there's going to be, I don't know if we're going to go to autarky totally, but there's going to be more emphasis on domestic production of masks and other medical devices and drugs in every country. So every country is going to want to have its own mask factory. So international trade is going to be diminished, at least partially. And I'm not as big an expert on political systems, but we've already seen some what I would characterize as unfortunate reactions in terms of the international system. For example, the United States expressing its displeasure with the World Health Organization by withholding funds, and that's, I think, an unfortunate development. I mean, the World Health Organization will survive perfectly well. Bill Gates will open his purse strings wider, and he will make up the loss. So the budget of the World Health Organization will not shrink, but you will have essentially one person controlling the global health agenda even more than he already does. And I'm not sure that's, the vision of an international system that people had in mind in 1946. When these institutions were created. And I'll let Alain, I'm sure he has something to add.
I think one of the very interesting lessons of this pandemic was we worked exactly the contrary than 2008. In 2008, G7, G8, G20, United States, European Union, every international organization tried to save the economic and financial system, and they worked together very efficiently. In this pandemic, the United States did not have a unified answer. It's states do what they want, county does what they want, half the beach do this and the other half do that. European Union disappeared totally, doesn't exist anymore. United Nations, not there at all. WHO was there with a lot of issues because they had to take care of the relations between everybody, like any other UN organization. It's the same with Interpol or everybody else. Everybody is very careful on what they express and how they work. And the whole global, international, supranational, federal system collapsed. That was very, very interesting and a little bit scary. Because the political part of the response was the one that failed. Economically or financially, we are creating money and we are trying to do 1 trillion, 2 trillion, 3 trillion, 10 trillions of what is really fake money. But it's a way to save the system. And okay, why not? I mean, as long as you don't have to repay it, that means bonds for the next 100 or 1,000 years, for 0.001%, and then we will shrink the bubbles of the previous crisis, which is almost honest and moral. But the international system show how unable it is to answer a global world crisis. And they were created for world crisis, so they had to go on a profound reform to handle what is not a war, what is not a political issue, what is not a military issue, what is not an attack, what is not terrorism. It's a pandemic. There is no political issue. We need to save the people. We need to give vaccines, treatments, whatever we can. And this, we fail miserably. And I think this will be a huge part of the work with next politicians we will deserve next time to rebuild it, to do what it is supposed to do, and what was the most easy part of their job, where they failed.
Just to follow up maybe on that thought, you were saying that there's a miserable failure. At the same time, you mentioned a few examples of countries, sometimes regions within countries that were able to succeed better than others. So would you say, echoes some of the questions, would you say that this is a general failure, or can we maybe see differences in regions, in countries, and even maybe continents in handling this between the Americas, EMEA, including also Africa, for example, and Asian regions and countries? Is there lessons that we can learn out of this, and is there ways we can go forward that will help everybody around the world? And do you think those, if there are differences, might be shifting a little bit the balance internationally between regions and countries from what they were before?
Well, I think, if I may, Andrew, I think we have A+ students, Taiwan, B students, China, South Korea, probably Germany, because we are still waiting to see what will happen with their opening of the lockdown. The epidemiologists are very doubtful on, is this a good way to do it? Because it's a federal country, so everybody is not doing the same thing exactly at the same time. It's a little more coordinated than the United States, but there are differences. We have strange issues with Sweden, for example, where they decide not to lock down, and they have a high level of contamination looking at Finland, Norway, Denmark, but still very low regarding what we have in Italy or France, for example, or Great Britain, of course. You have a lot of various ways to handle the thing. My point is, unfortunately, there was no European, no international, no global coordination. And of course, you will find a very good part of Italy, which is the region Venetia, the region around Venice, did pretty well. Lombardia did pretty bad. And it's not a question of money. Lombardy is has a much more higher income and level of spending than Venetia. It's a question of political decision, or talking to the experts, but doing the right thing as elected body. Experts do expertise. They are not elected. The politics needs to do its job too. but you have a lot of good samples, city by city. For example, the west of France is a perfect success. Western France, almost nothing. Eastern France is a drama. Who knows why? It's a centralized country, but people did things another way. They didn't wait so long. The thing worked very strangely as a geographical spreading. We are learning from it, but we see huge differences. And Switzerland is a very interesting case. Luxembourg is a very interesting case. Denmark, they reopened school very wisely and it's a very coordinated way. Netherlands, they were changing policies. So, of course, there is a lot of good students, less good students. The problem was nobody was coordinating even best practices.
I would just like to add that, the report card that Alain just provided, this is the midterm report card. And we don't know the final grades yet. And it's really important to think about time frame, time scale. I would actually give South Korea an A along with Taiwan. But I said 12 to 48 months. We don't know yet what the final grades will be, because here in the United States, we also have this phenomenon where different regions are doing differently. But we have a patchwork epidemic, and I think some regions simply haven't gotten it yet as much. And we just don't know how this will play out. Taiwan needs to maintain its vigilance, or it can still go from A to F. Mm. And Sweden may climb from C- to B+, but or it may sink from C- to F if it becomes a source of Norway and Finland getting lower grades. We just don't know yet how this will all play out. Taiwan has certain advantages. It's an island. It has one major international airport for the entire country. It has relations with its closest trading partner that has been sometimes cool. And there are certain things that facilitate Taiwan doing well, but Taiwan could have an epidemic if they don't maintain their vigilance. So it's a very fluid situation. It's a very complicated situation, and we need to think in terms of time scales. I share my raised eyebrow at what Sweden is doing, but Sweden may have the last laugh by the time this is all done. We don't know exactly the time dimensions of this, but that being said, as of today, I agree with what Alain said.
We are running out of time. Time flies, and thank you, because the discussion we are having is just great. As a conclusion, I would love to ask you one question to each of you. What did you learn out of the experience we are facing right now? What are the findings that you get very briefly? What is a takeaway that you want to share with the audience of this session, not session, about the phase we are experiencing right now with the lockdown?
I'll go first. I guess for me, there's been not only a lack of preparedness, but the lack of preparedness is really driven by a lack of imagination. I mean, we saw this coming in the United States in mid-January, and we did nothing for 6 weeks. We did absolutely nothing for 6 weeks. And then for 2 weeks after that, we did not enough. And then we sprung into action. I mean, people warned that this was going to be severe. I'm one of the people who, expressed serious concerns about what was happening in China in mid-January. And, many of my colleagues in the public health enterprise writ large said, do you know how many people die of flu every year? Do you have any idea how many people die of flu every year? Well, as a matter of fact, I do, because I've written some peer-reviewed papers on the subject of influenza mortality burden. So I have a very good idea how many people die of flu. And I knew very well back then that because this is a bug to which no one has previous immunity, vastly unlike flu, that this was going to be much more severe And I'm sorry to say that I've been proven right, but there's just a complete lack of imagination and lack of ability to think outside the box that has not served us well. And so we need to be more adaptable, and we need to be open to more viewpoints and strategies than we have been.
Alain, what are your findings?
My findings is right on the way with one of Andrew, which is too much information kills information and doesn't help decision. And so the big issue of the moment is we have too many datas and not enough analysts. So we need to invest in human brains and not only machines.
Thank you.
Thank you very much also from our end. This was a very exciting discussion, looking at what is currently happening. And also I hope for all the audience, even though we were able to reply to all questions, very enriching and actually showing us on a macro level, but also sometimes on a very specific level, how we might be needing to change our ways of behaving in many different ways, from the private life to the professional life, and how then effectively we can start managing out of this situation. I will let you, Jean-Michel, if you want to close up the session.
I just want to thank you for taking time and preparing this session. After this discussion, I am convinced that what we started with Berkeley a few weeks ago, only a few weeks ago, is very positive, because this is the opportunity to have a global discussion and to share vision. And on quite a few topics, you guys were definitely looking in the same direction, sharing obviously the same data, sharing the same part of the vision and so on. So this is very positive from my point of view, to be able to feed and to share what we are doing, which is what we are doing right now. This is almost the end of this session. I want to thank you once again. I just want to make the announcement that the next session will be on the 15th of May. So in about 2 weeks, we're going to have another session. The topic will be very linked to the discussion we are having. It's linked to tactical and strategical rebound or restart. So with maybe focusing more on the business side, how do we take into account all what we discussed previously should be part of the discussion in 2 weeks. So thank you to you. Thank you also to the audience, because we are very pleased to have so many followers. For the people who attended this session, please fill up the survey, and we will be able to adapt and to enrich our discussion. And the video of this session will be available very quickly. You will receive an email, and you will be able to watch this video and maybe share this video in the near future. Thank you to the audience, and of course, thank you to the panelists. And I just share a few flowers from Paris, a few flowers to say goodbye, and see you soon online with our friends from Berkeley. Thank you, Alain, and thank you, Andrew.
See you soon. Hope to see you before 2024, in vivo.
Merci beaucoup à tout le monde, et merci pour tout.
Merci bien. Take good care.
Thank you all.